Before anyone really noticed, something unusual started happening in the electric car world. While most companies were busy chasing speed, luxury, and headline-grabbing technology, one quiet contender began asking a much more dangerous question: what if none of that actually matters? What if the car that changes everything isn't the fastest or the most expensive, but simply the one that works best for everyday life? And that's exactly where the story of the MG4 Electric begins, not as a flashy revolution, but as a slow, calculated move that almost no one took seriously at first, because on the surface, MG doesn't look like the company you'd expect to disrupt anything. It started as a British brand, but today it operates under the massive Chinese giant SAIC motor, which quietly gave it something most competitors struggle with: control. Control over manufacturing, cost, and technology all at once. But instead of jumping straight into electric cars like everyone else, MG did something different. It waited. It built trust, first with regular petrol cars, especially SUVs, slowly entering markets and learning what people actually wanted. And that decision didn't seem important at the time, but it becomes critical once you see what happened next. By the time MG finally introduced the MG4 Electric, it wasn't testing the waters, it was executing a plan. And the real test didn't happen in one place. It happened in two of the toughest markets in the world. First, China, where the EV space is brutally competitive. Dozens of companies fighting on price, range, and features, where weak products disappear almost instantly. The MG4 didn't dominate there, but it survived. And in a market like China, survival already means something is working. But this only gets interesting when the car moves to Europe, because that's where things usually fall apart. Europe doesn't forgive compromises. Buyers there don't just look at price. They care about safety, driving, feel, quality, and long-term reliability. And historically, this is where affordable cars struggle the most. But somehow, the MG4 didn't. It slipped into a gap that almost no one was targeting properly between expensive premium EVs like Tesla and overpriced traditional brands, still figuring out electric cars. Suddenly, people in places like the UK, Germany, and France started noticing something strange. This car wasn't just cheap, it actually felt complete. And that's where the real tension begins, because now the question changes. If an affordable car can survive China and succeed in Europe, then what exactly is it doing differently? At first, the answer seems simple: the design. Because the moment you look at the MG4, it doesn't behave like a budget car. The sharp front, the aggressive lines, the futuristic rear, it feels intentional. Not over-designed, not boring. Just enough to make you look twice. And inside, it gets even more subtle. Clean dashboard, minimal buttons, digital screens. It doesn't try to impress you with complexity. It just feels modern. But design alone doesn't explain why people trust it. And this is where the story quietly shifts beneath the surface. Because the real difference isn't what the car is built on. Most affordable EVs cut corners by modifying petrol cars, squeezing batteries into spaces never designed for them. And that creates compromises you can't always see immediately. Less space, poor balance, awkward performance. But MG didn't do that here. The MG4 is built on a dedicated EV platform, designed from the ground up as an electric car. And that changes everything, just not in the way most people expect. The battery sits flat under the floor, lowering the center of gravity. That means better stability, especially in turns. The weight is distributed more evenly, making the car feel more planted on the road. And then there's something you almost never see in this price range: rear-wheel drive. Power going to the back wheels instead of the front. It sounds like a small detail, but it completely changes how the car feels when you accelerate. Smoother, more balanced, less strain. These are the kinds of things you don't notice in a test drive, but you feel over time. And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. Because now we have a car that looks good, feels balanced, and is engineered properly. But everything still depends on one thing people care about more than anything else: the battery. The range, that number every EV buyer obsesses over. MG claims around 450 kilometers, which sounds impressive. But numbers like this always come with a catch. And the reality is, that number is never what you actually get in the city, where traffic slows you down and regenerative braking helps recover energy. The MG4 performs well. You can realistically expect somewhere between 380 to 420 kilometers if you drive calmly. but highways tell a different story. Higher speeds, constant power demand, less braking, the range drops, sometimes to around 300 to 350 kilometers. Add air conditioning in hot weather, and you lose a bit more. Drive aggressively, and it drops even faster. And suddenly, the big number doesn't feel so certain anymore. But here's the part most people misunderstand. That number was never the real advantage, because even when the range fluctuates, the car still does something quietly powerful. It reduces the stress of ownership. If you drive 40 to 50 kilometers a day, you don't need to charge every night. You can go 3, maybe 4 days without thinking about it, and that changes behavior. It turns the car from something you manage into something that just fits into your life. And once that happens, another shift begins. The real advantage reveals itself in cost, not the price you pay up front, but what happens after. Compare it to a diesel car. Every kilometer costs you fuel. Maintenance adds up oil changes, filters, engine wear. With an EV, most of that disappears. Charging at home costs significantly less per kilometer. Fewer moving parts mean fewer problems. And over time, those small differences quietly turn into something much bigger. Ownership stops being expensive and starts feeling efficient, logical. And that's when the entire conversation changes. Because now, this isn't about whether the MG4 is fast enough or luxurious enough. It's about whether those things even matter anymore. And that brings us to the moment where everything collides. Tesla, BYD, and MG3. Completely different philosophies competing for the same future. Tesla pushes performance and technology, creating cars that feel ahead of their time, but at a price many people simply can't justify. BYD focuses on safety and affordability, building reliable EVs for the masses with strong battery technology. And then there's MG, doing something much quieter, not trying to win in one category, but trying to be good enough in all of them. And that balance is what makes the MG4 difficult to ignore. It doesn't dominate, it doesn't overwhelm, it just fits into different markets, different lifestyles, different expectations. In Europe, it offers an alternative to expensive EV. In developing markets, it becomes an entry point for first-time buyers. In places where fuel prices keep rising, it becomes a way out. And slowly, without making too much noise, it starts spreading, which leads to a question that feels small at first, that gets bigger the more you think about it. What if the future of electric cars isn't being decided by the most advanced technology or the strongest brand, but by something much simpler? What if the car that wins is just the one that makes the most sense? And if that sounds too simple to be true, that's exactly why most people miss it, because the EV industry has trained us to look in the wrong direction. Bigger batteries, faster acceleration, smarter software. Every launch feels like a competition to prove who's the most advanced. But in real life, most drivers don't use half of those features. They don't need insane acceleration. They don't drive hundreds of kilometers every day. What they actually care about is much quieter. How easy the car is to live with when no one is watching. And this is where the MG4 starts doing something subtle but powerful. It removes friction, no engine noise when you start it, no vibration when you're stuck in traffic, no constant thought about fuel prices going up again. You just get in, drive, and leave. At first, it feels like a small improvement, but over weeks and months, it compounds into something bigger. Driving becomes less of a task and more of a background activity. And once that shift happens, going back to a traditional car starts to feel outdated. But there's still one problem that hasn't fully disappeared: charging. Because no matter how efficient or affordable an EV is, it only works if you can actually keep it running without stress. And this is where reality varies depending on where you live. In some cities, charging stations are growing quickly. In others, they're still limited. Home charging solves most of the problem, but not everyone has that option. And this is where the MG4 doesn't magically fix everything. It simply makes the problem more manageable. Fast charging helps during longer trips, topping up the battery when needed. Planning becomes part of the experience, but not in a complicated way, more like a habit you slowly develop. You start thinking ahead, not because you're forced to, but because it makes things smoother. And interestingly, this changes how people drive. Less rushing, more awareness, more control. And that shift is something no spec sheet talks about. Because once drivers adapt, something unexpected happens. Range anxiety, the biggest fear around EVs, starts to fade. Not completely, but enough to stop dominating every decision. And when that fear weakens, the entire value of the car becomes clearer. You stop asking, will this work? And start asking, why wasn't this always the standard?